Hello everyone and welcome back to Dragalia Foundry, a fan channel where everything Dragalia Lost can be found. Today's video is going to be a preview of the Fire Emblem Lost Heroes event. We got information today about mana spirals for all of the rerun characters, so we're going to read over and analyze how they're being powered up for the rerun. We also found out that the latest chapter in the story of the main game is coming out tomorrow, Chapter 13. Not to mention, we have a ton of Void battles releasing, well, at least 2 new ones, but probably a ton of Void endeavors, and those give us a pretty clear direction as far as what the new Agito battle will be at the end of this month. So this video is just going to be kind of a quick recap on some of the news, a little bit of analysis on the mana spirals, and a way to kind of get ahead of all the content coming out tomorrow. Cygames and Nintendo have fallen into this pattern where toward the end of the month we get a lot of content at once. It does make it a little bit hard to create videos around that when everything drops simultaneously. So I'm going to make this video as a way of organizing and collecting ourselves, giving some initial impressions, and then throughout the week, hopefully I'll have time to play the Fire Emblem Lost Heroes event, give any commentary on how that's changed and talk that over, as well as showing some gameplay for it, and also probably give an impression on the story chapter, since Chapter 13 seems like it's going to be really big for the game. So looking forward to playing that this week. I guess let's start there, since that's the oldest piece of news here, or one of the oldest pieces of news. There's a really cool trailer if you want to check it out. It does look like it probably includes some still images and artwork from the new chapter, so if you want to go in blind, I wouldn't fault you for that either. The trailer is pretty hyped though. We know that Ferris appeared at the end of chapter 12, and so I would anticipate that's going to get resolved one way or another this chapter, so I'm looking forward to seeing what happens, and I would expect that we'll probably have some type of catch-up campaign tomorrow as well, even though that's not announced. And just in general, this is a really good time to hop into Dragalia Lost. There's a ton more permanent content in the game than ever before, and we have the Fire Emblem Lost Heroes rerun happening. You can get yourself really well situated for the second event, the second Fire Emblem event that's happening once this one ends, or perhaps in the middle of it. And you can use your free daily tenfolds when you first start playing to take advantage of the Fire Emblem Summon Showcase. So this is a really good time to jump into the game. If you're more enfranchised, you've been here a while, let's take a look at Void battles. This was actually announced earlier in the week. It looks like our next Void Chimera is of the Wind element. It's this Wind Chimera that pretty much implies that you're going to be able to craft Wind Chimera Tech weapons from this, and therefore that the Agito boss that's coming out at the end of this month is likely going to be Ciella, the water element boss. So it seems like you really want to tune up your wind teams right now. Hopefully you already have some tier 2 high dragon weapons crafted in the wind element, and you can utilize those. Probably want to hold on to some Damascus ingots in case you need to power up any of those weapons in order to get your initial clears on expert difficulty of Ciella's Trial or Ciella's Wrath. We'll take a look at what Ciella looks like, and I'll give some speculation on her as a character. I know that she's in a different news announcement, but you can also see that in one of these little still arts that it looks like that phantom is new to me, the reddish one. I'm not 100% sure on that, but perhaps it's new, perhaps that's the way that you get weapons that are effective against the Wind Chimera. So let's go back a little bit just to look at Ciella while we talk about what I think she could be like as a boss. I know that she was at least mentioned at the beginning of the month. Here we go. This is her artwork right here. So it does appear that she's an archer. It looks like she's a Sylvan, and I think that a fan theory has gained a lot of traction that these characters tend to be foils to the main story protagonist. With Kaiyan, we saw him lash out against Luca and Luca's acceptance of people of all different backgrounds, like Sylvans, Roken, and so on. With Volk, we saw him really upset with Ronzel's privilege as a noble, and that was kind of his angle or his issue as an Agito boss. So with Ciella and Elisan being our main protagonist water character, I would imagine that Ciella might have some issues with the Ilian faith or church. Perhaps she is kind of anti-establishment or anti-religion in some way, anti-orthodoxy. Then we have the twins here, who are likely flame element, and a lot of commenters have pointed this out, and I definitely agree, that because there are two of them, they seem most likely to represent a foil to Lakshi and Mascula, the androids that joined our team, not necessarily a foil to Yuden. So I do think that that's probably the case, and in the way that Lakshi and Mascula bonded so well together despite their differences, perhaps these twins will kind of like be at odds with each other, or maybe there'll be some other tension to that character. But when it comes to Ciella, with her being an archer, here is my hope for this trial. My hope is that she is more of a glass cannon, because right now our only endgame water boss is High Mercury. High Mercury is a very tanky boss, high amount of HP, and she seems much more defensive in nature. Even though some of her attacks come out pretty fast, in general I would say I just kind of get a tank or slower vibe from her. I would love to see Ciella be a totally different type of water boss that moves around really quickly, very rapid fire, lots of smaller hitboxes as opposed to these giant whirlpools and giant waterfalls. Like, I could imagine her raining down arrows and just kind of a bullet hell segment where you have to dodge around them. The other thing that I hope they really play into is the freeze affliction here, because really freeze has been non-existent. We've never gotten a raid battle or facility event, to my knowledge, where you had to worry about freeze. At least not that I can think of. You know, maybe there is one, but really for wind characters, the only ones that come to mind are Winds of Hope, which was Luis and Lowen's facility event, and that focused on Bog. And then, what else did we get as a raid? We got Sabnok, and Sabnok also causes Bog. So I hope that freeze actually makes a comeback here. It's only really present right now in Void Poseidon and also in Imperial Onslaughts, but those fights are too easy where you don't actually get to experience it. But freeze has a very interesting space as an affliction when enemies cause it on you, because allied characters, if they attack you once, they break you out of freeze. So I think you can afford to push freeze a little bit more aggressively than you do sleep and stun when it comes to enemies afflicting it on you, since there's always the option to break people out. And I actually think that there's some really fun design space here, right, where Bog makes you very slow when you're bogged, so freeze res characters might end up being super slow to move, and bog res characters might end up being frozen. There might be sequences or segments of the fight where your freeze res characters have to break out the frozen characters, but they're bogged, so they're moving around really slowly to have to rush to them in time to break them out. I could easily see the mobility becoming a really cool factor or mechanic in this fight. And then as a final word on Ciella, I know people have been somewhat upset with Hawk and his dominance and power in soloing Master High Dragon Trials. I saw that a lot of people commented on my solos video, so thank you for watching that. That was really fun to put together. But people don't necessarily like Hawk right now. I like Hawk. I've used Hawk. He was the person I used for my first clear in Master High Mercury's trial last November. That said, I don't know that he is necessarily broken, and we have to wait and see. You know, this enemy could have 100% stun res, and suddenly that's a game changer for Hawk. Or it could be something like Volk, where there's moments that you want to stun, but they're not necessarily immediate in the fight. In Volk's case, it's often best to try stun during the Blood Moon or Vitality steals, and thanks to the Plague mechanic, you can stun him repeatedly. But imagine if there's a late section of the Ciella fight where you want to stun, but because you don't want to sandbag your DPS as Hawk, you stun early on, you get in a little extra damage, but it doesn't really matter that much because the HP is high enough that, yes, you froze her for a little bit, but you didn't really cancel any harsh or unavoidable attack. So I do think, honestly, if you just can stun her one time, depending on how she's designed, it might not really matter. The reason it matters a lot in Master High Dragons is because of that opening blast segment, and the reason it matters in Volk is because he can get plagued and therefore be stunned multiple times late into the fight. So if they design her well, I think she could be susceptible to stun, and it doesn't really change the game, especially with how all these Agito bosses transform. So even if you have 3 Hawks and you stun her at the beginning and just transform her immediately, well, now you actually have to clear the fight and she's transformed. So depending on how valuable having those 3 ranged Hawks is, that may or may not be easy to do. And the other thing is, like I said, if she's a very mobile character, throwing out a lot of small hitboxes, constantly moving, teleporting, it's not necessarily that easy to land all of those 4 strikes on her. Hawk's buff 4 strikes are easier to land because it's a larger area than a normal archer 4 strike, but if she is moving around the map a lot, it might not be that easy. So I just want to throw that out there as some possible solace to people. I expect she'll probably be out by the end of this week or end of next week, so it's not going to be long before we see her. And honestly, I don't know if we're going to get more wind spirals before she comes out. We might not, and so I'm very curious with the current wind roster what ends up being used and popular and meta. And frankly, if it ends up being Hawk, I'm not going to be too upset about it, especially if he's more of a role player rather than a triple Hawk team. But that's all I really want to say on Ciella. Let's go to the Fire Emblem Heroes rerun, and then last up we'll talk about the mana spirals to close this video. So Fire Emblem Lost Heroes is coming back. This is about the showcase, but the event was also announced to come back. Here's the event revival announcement. So this featured a unique type of gameplay called defensive battles. In these battles, waves of enemies are coming to attack a castle wall that you have to protect. And there's different lanes the enemies are coming through, so you often want to spread out among the 3 people you're playing co-op with in order to block the various lanes. There's different elements of enemies coming in the different waves, so sometimes it's better to have a certain element to knock out a particular wave very quickly. There's also houses on the edges of the map that you have to rescue in order to get bonuses for your entire team, buffs for your team. There's a trade-off there to where you can overextend and try to rescue them, but the next wave of enemies might spawn behind you, so then you have to rush back and try, I guess, cut them off before they get to the castle. So there's some nice tension to this gameplay, and if it's rebalanced around our new weapons, at least the harder difficulty is balanced around our new weapons, it could still be very, very fun. It's actually one of the few modes where dragons are super helpful because of their area of effect moves, making it easy to mow down a lot of these smaller enemies at once. And there are different types of enemies that can apply different types of pressure, like there are Cyclopses that can throw boulders directly at your castle. So suddenly that's a huge threat that you have to take out very quickly, or at least draw their aggro away from your castle. So I think it's a very fun mode. It's points based, or at least it was before, so like saving the houses gets you more points, not taking any damage on your castle gets you more points, clearing more quickly gets you more points. And there's also something that happens at the very end of the wave battle, which is an enemy called the Shadow Knight, I believe, spawns. So one thing to be aware of, you really want to try clear that enemy to get more points if you can. So don't necessarily rush. Once all the enemies stop spawning, the lanes free up. There's gates that block the second half of the fight, which is just the boss battle. You don't want to rush through those doors to the boss battle. You want to wait a second. The Shadow Knight will spawn near one of the houses, I believe, and your whole team can take him on to get more points and more rewards. The Shadow Knight is Shadow Element, at least it was, so this is a reason why players often prefer to use a Light Element character, or maybe somebody like Lily, who at the time was pretty good because she could freeze it. So now there's a lot of different units available, so there are probably even more ways to approach this than there were in the past. I mean, there certainly are, but that's kind of the gist of this particular event. there's lots of supplemental things too. Like there's a trial where you fight Veronica, a trial where you fight Alfonse. They're kind of like high dragon trials, and the hitboxes they throw out, they're pretty challenging and pretty fun, honestly. And there's also just a wave-based mode that's a little bit better for beginners, but it's just waves on a circular arena, so you don't have to worry about lanes and management and things like that. It's kind of a good mode to farm up basic materials. And I think the other thing they did was there's badges that you use in a treasure trade, and you can get the small badges from any quest in the game. So even if you're doing story quests, you can collect these badges, or your daily quests. So it's probably a good idea to enter the event first, so that from then on, any of your regular quests you're doing get you badges that you can use in a treasure trade. I'll definitely link in after this video or in the comments to a playlist with my Fire Emblem Lost Heroes videos from last year. You know, some things may change. It may not be exactly one-to-one, but I would imagine that it's going to be pretty similar because it's a rerun with some refreshes, some updates as well. So the showcase that's coming back is apparently identical to the showcase we had last year. Marth is on focus, Fjorm is on focus, and Veronica is on focus. Everyone gets Alfonse for free from part 1 of the event, and for part 2, we're going to get Sharina once part 2 is out. So you're going to get those two for free, but if you want to summon for Marth, Fjorm, or Veronica, this upcoming showcase is going to be your chance to do so. On this showcase description, it's showing their stats at level 80. So now, for the last part of this video, we're going to look at their mana spirals, which, if you're not familiar with this, mana spirals are a way that you can kind of limit break or unlock the potential of your characters. When you unlock their mana spiral, you can level them up to 100, you can level up their skills to gain new effects. It's a pretty cool system, not without some controversy, because sometimes the originality doesn't always feel super prevalent in how they redesign or power up the characters after they get their mana spiral. But that said, it's always a power upgrade. It's never like somebody has been nerfed because of the mana spiral that they got. And in all of these adventures cases, it's pretty much just a straight power upgrade. How much of a power upgrade is a little hard to tell, because in Dragalia, of course, you have the skill descriptions, but it says it does damage. It doesn't tell you how much damage or what the modifier percentage on that damage is. So sometimes characters with really vanilla or plain looking mana spirals like Vice, for example, ended up having just really busted amounts of damage. So despite the text looking really simple, you know, the characters might actually be super, super good. So let's start with Marth here. Marth has Flickering Flames, deals flame damage to enemies directly ahead, inflicts burn, and gradually recovers the user's HP for 15 seconds. And then Fire Emblem deals flame damage to enemies in a line, burning foes take extra damage. Also activates Skill Shift if the attack connects. Phase 1 increases the user's strength by 10% for 10 seconds. Phase 2 increases the entire team's strength by 10% for 10 seconds. And Phase 3 increases the entire team's strength by 10% and their attack rate by 30% for 10 seconds. Very sweet team buffs. Basically, what's new here is the fact that Flickering Flames causes burn, and Fire Emblem does more damage to burned foes. Perhaps some of these percentages are higher, but I don't think the 10% are higher. Maybe the 30% is higher. Maybe that was 20% before. I'm not 100% sure on that. Let's check on the actual summoning page. Nope, it looks like that's the same. So basically, they've added burn to Marth, which, you know, I can't say is a bad thing. There's prints that let you do extra damage to burning foes, such as Elegant Escort. So Burning Punisher, being enabled by Marth, is a positive. That's a strong worm print. His co-ability is unchanged. Dragon Haste of 15%. Chain co-ability is unchanged. He got a good chain co-ability. Sometimes Dragon Haste isn't the most exciting co-ability, but I noticed that they often gave Dragon Haste characters a pretty solid chain to kind of compensate for that. And in terms of abilities, Marth Stun Res became Potent Stun Res, meaning that he can get a buff if he takes an attack that would have stunned him. His last boost 3 now can activate twice per quest, and it fills your entire team's skill gauges, which is a huge amount of damage to unload. I mean, having 2 to 3 skills on all your characters at once, getting that twice per quest, You could probably bring Marth to like off-element high dragons and cheese them pretty easily at this point by having him tank the opening blast. It doesn't activate again for 15 seconds, so you'll want to unleash as much damage as possible. 15 seconds later, maybe take a small hit or something after you've, say, healed off your first skill or through some other means. But yeah, this is a really huge amount of damage to be able to unleash, and if you're running with like a 4 Marth team comp, only one of them needs to fall to low HP. Granted, him being at level 100, his stats are going to be a little better. It might be harder for him to fall to 30% of his max HP, depending on what he's geared out with, but you can sort of always work around your gear and chain co-abilities so that you do take that initial hit and fall to low HP. It's a really good effect. Whirlwind Devastation has changed. Now it only requires a combo count of 10 or higher in order to get a critical rate increase of 13%. It used to be 15. Marth is probably still going to want to run worm prints that require him to have a 15-hit combo, I would imagine. Although maybe now he could run Elegant Escort and something like Mega Friends or the Shining Overlord. So maybe not, but 10 hits is certainly easier to keep than 15 hits, but I don't think 15 was too hard for him as a sword either. A little slower to ramp, but not too hard to keep. Next up, we have Fjorm. As a lot of people predicted, Fjorm got Frostbite on her Frigid Smash. It used to just inflict freeze, and her Ice Mirror has changed so that it now does a drain life effect. It heals her based on the amount of damage it does, up to a cap of 30% of her max HP. This counter isn't something that's simulated very well in like DPS sims for Dragalia, but it's sizable. You know, there used to be a strategy around using 4 Fjorms. Fjorm, as we'll see, has 100% skill prep, so just immediately everybody countering the initial blast from Hybridnilda's Trial. Pretty popular and effective strategy, or things like countering the chip damage on the Scorching Air in Void Agni. Those used to be popular strategies. For some reason, I feel like Fjorm never got the hate that you see coming toward Hawk and Tobias nowadays. Same thing with Wedding Elisanne, like 2 Wedding Elisanne comps have been common, 4 Glio comps have been common. For Pipple comps, these duplicate comps or duplicate adventure comps have been a thing in Dragalia for a long time. For some reason, Hawk just seems to have set people off a lot more. But yeah, Fjorm has always been able to be used to cheese. Nowadays, you see the 4 Pipple more often. If you're doing a speed run, you probably see like 3 Summer Celiera and a DPS of some type in order to just break and destroy the enemy. But I would imagine with the Mana Spiral, probably unsaid here, but the Ice Mirror damage is probably going to go up as well, in addition to healing her. She still has her same co-ability of HP plus 15%, and her chain co-ability increases the user's strength when they inflict Frostbite. So this is why a lot of people thought she was going to get Frostbite. And frankly, Frostbite equals user strength is really prevalent. Like, it's widely available. So despite the fact that there are very few Frostbite enablers, you can stack this chain co-ability to ridiculous degrees at this point. I mean, just having Fjorm and Lazri together on a team, right? When either of them uses their first skill and causes Frostbite, they're getting a 26% strength buff off of that. And it lasts for 15 seconds, and it won't activate again for 10 seconds, which means there's a 5-second window where you can overlap it as well and have a 52% strength buff. So I think this is actually kind of interesting. They've implemented afflictions a little bit differently in all of the elements, despite afflictions just becoming so dominant now compared to how they were in the past. Like, you look at burning, not a lot of characters have Burning Punisher built in. However, the Burning Punisher Wormprint cap is 30%, and there's only one Wormprint with Burning Punisher. It has that cap, and it's called Elegant Escort. So that's kind of how burning works, is a lot of characters can burn, there's not a lot of sources of Punisher other than that Wormprint and the Dragon Apollo. Poison is a little bit different too. So Poison, I think there's 2 different sources of prints that can cause Punisher. A lot of characters also have Poison Killer, which is a built-in damage increase built into their skill. I've named it, or we've named it as a community, a little bit differently. A lot of people prefer to call it that because it actually interacts with Punisher in a multiplicative way, so it doesn't just add up with the Punisher mechanics. Like Hawk is an example of a character who has this, Curran has this, a lot of characters have this, I think Eric has it. And then with Frostbite now, Frostbite, it seems like the print that came out with Frostbite Punisher, it's only 20% Punisher, doesn't seem that good. Mitsuba has Frostbite Killer, so to speak, but the chain co-abilities are available on really good units, I think, in the Frostbite and Water. So yeah, it's kind of interesting. It's got me very curious. Like, they're subtly differentiating it. Paralysis and Light, you see a lot more characters who have Punisher built in, which is kind of similar to how Poison is. There's a lot of characters who just have straight up Poison Punisher. You also have Spirit of the Season, which gives you Strength and Paralysis Punisher, but no other Paralysis Punisher Wormprint. And then you've got some interesting one-offs like Summer Cleo, which gives you Paralysis equals Skill Haste, I believe. So yeah, they've kind of done a few subtle differences across the elements, and maybe one reason why they're not completing cycles as much is to kind of make them feel a little bit different to play, despite these all just being damage over time afflictions essentially. But I do think there's some potential in this chain co-ability, so that's all I really want to point out. For abilities, Fjorm has Last Bravery 3. This was a major part of her cheese strat. Increases the entire team strength by 30% and defense by 40% for 15 seconds when the user's HP drops to 30% twice per quest. So now it's updated to twice, and just like with Marth, there's a 15-second cooldown. So the defense buff is pretty large, but a large reason people wanted that or cared about that was because they would run Wormprints on Fjorm that gave her strength double buff, meaning every Fjorm on the team, if you have 4, is going to cause a defense buff to everyone else. So you're going to get 4 defensive buffs. That's going to trigger strength double buff abilities 4 times. So let's say you have Brothers in Arms on her, which is a print that gives you 13% strength double buff plus Broken Punisher. With that worm print, you can get 52% strength just by all 4 Fjorms triggering their defensive buff. Plus, you have the 30% strength from each of them. So that's 120 plus 52, which, yeah, 172% strength right off the bat. In the beginning of a high dragon trial, you're causing Frostbite. Maybe you have some chain co-abilities in your backline to help you cause that. So that's potentially another 26%. Like, you could very easily get 200% strength, I think, off of Fjorm, or close to that, 150 plus off of Fjorm in the beginning of a fight, and that might just be enough to kill the enemy. So, pretty cool stuff, and if nothing else, maybe that Brothers in Arms, you know, you break the enemy, then you have Broken Punisher all of a sudden, transform into Leviathan, who's got one of the best dragon forms, can bog Master Hydranhilda. So, pretty potent burn res, speaking of which, 100% burn res. If she would get burned, instead she gets a buff. I guess this works on the initial blast as well. So you would have already a 15% strength buff. So that's 1 icon, 4 icons from the Last Bravery, and then 4 icons from the double buff. So that's already 9 icons, and then 1 from Frost. So you probably can't really, although I don't know how chain co-ability stacking works. I think the way it stacks is that you would get 1 26% size buff if you, say, have Lazar in the backline, but it could be that you get 2 13% size buffs, in which case you would go over the limit, which is 10%, or 10 of the same type of buff icon. So you can only have 10 different sources of strength buffs. So there may be some capping here that actually does become relevant. Skill prep of 100% has been upgraded to now have skill charge. So after you use the skill, you're going to fill your gauges by 5%. Probably good. You know, Frigid Smash was always fairly quick to charge. That's probably going to help, but I don't know that the 5% necessarily matches up with any particular breakpoints or anything like that that Fjorm had on her skill charge rates. But perhaps it could be used to get her skills out faster, have higher frostbite uptime. I guess that's it for Fjorm. Let's move on to Veronica. That's going to be the last character we talk about today. Or wait, Alfonse. We still have Alfonse. We still got a little bit to go. So let's start with Veronica, though. Veronica's Gespenst has changed so that it deals shadow damage to target nearby enemies. That was always there. Poison foes take extra damage. That's new. Damage will be increased as the user's HP decreases. That's the same. If the user's HP is above or equal to 50% of max HP, consumes 10% of max HP to fill the skill's skill gauge by 20%. That is awesome. Veronica didn't have a way to get herself to low HP in order to take advantage of the heightened damage of Gespenst. So now, at a minimum, she has a way to get herself down to 40% of her HP, which is pretty good. So I do like to see that. She does more damage to poison foes, which there's so much poison running around that I guess that's okay. Nosferatu deals shadow damage to surrounding enemies and restores 8% of the damage inflicted as HP to the user. This now caps at 23%, up from, I think, 15%. So Nosferatu is kind of interesting with Veronica because in the olden days, I believe, Gespenst, you just wanted to fire off Gespenst as quickly as possible. And with like 6% skill haste or so, you could do this in 2 5-hit combos with the wands. And so you just wanted to spam it. I don't think you even really wanted to use Nosferatu for Veronica because if she was at 1 HP or a very low HP, you didn't want to be healing her up. It might be different now depending on the skill modifiers on these. And the fact that now Gespenst can at least force her to be a little bit lower, at least down to 40%. So, interesting. I'm not sure if Nosferatu will end up being used, but Veronica has her skill damage co-ability. It's a great co-ability. Chain co-ability, interestingly, settles at 40%. So this actually is a little relevant here because she can force herself down to 40% HP, but not lower than that. So she can just get into the range where she can utilize this and get 10% light res, which is fine. Very defensive co-ability, could be completely irrelevant, but at least she has the skill damage regular co-ability, and so her chain co-ability isn't too horrible. For abilities, she has Last Destruction 3. This has changed quite a lot. This used to increase the damage of her next skill by 40%, I believe. Now, it increases the damage of the next attack skill used by each team member by 10%. So, 10% for each character. It's small. But it increases the user's attack skills by 30% for the remainder of the quest when the user's HP drops to 30% once per quest. So you can get a permanent 30% skill damage buff on her and temporary 10% buff on the entire team. It's only once per quest. You do have to fall to 30% HP, which she can't cause herself to fall that low. So you have to take some type of hit in order to get there, but still, this seems very strong. Having a permanent 30% skill damage buff is no joke, so I expect this to be quite good. Potent Paralysis res of 100%, similar to everything we've seen above, and then skill prep plus 100% and skill charge. This 5% I think might be enough to make it so that you can cast Gespenst repeatedly in just 2 5-hit wand combos. Maybe not the first time because you're not going to get that extra bits of charge, but every subsequent use I think that might be enough. Alright, Alfonse is our real last character here. So Alfonse has Blue Radiance, increases the user's strength by 20% for 12 seconds. So 12 seconds is higher than it used to be. It used to be 10 seconds, I think. Deals light damage to enemies directly ahead and inflicts paralysis. Very solid. The paralysis is new. The amount of the buff duration has gone up. And the fact that it deals light damage was always there. But, I mean, it's a lot in one package. This skill was a little bit slower to charge, however. I think it was like 3,300 SP, something like that, when a lot of swords have like 2,400, 2,500 for their first skill. Soul deals light damage to surrounding enemies and restores 5% of the damage inflicted as HP to the user. This recovery caps at 20% of their maximum HP. damage will be increased as the user's HP decreases. That last line is definitely new here, and that's cool. It's kind of like a crisis effect for Alfonse. When his HP is low, he can deal more damage and effectively heal himself for more with a cap of 20% of his maximum HP. I really like Alfonse as a character. I think for wave-based content, like, his kit, it's simple, but I think for a welfare character, like, they've done a very good job with Alfonse here. He has Dragon Haste as a co-ability. This chain co-ability of 6% strength at HP 60%, which is okay. This is one that it's solid, but I find it really not making my team most of the time. Like, Marth's chain co-ability, you're getting 13%, but you have to maintain a certain amount of combo. I think that just tends to be preferred when you're running a sword. And Light has a lot of good chain co-abilities, so I don't know that Alfonse would necessarily make a great backliner per se, but for a welfare character, like, this is at least relevant, and he's a sword, so they've given him an offensive chain co-ability. It kind of makes sense to me. For abilities, Last Burst 3 increases strength by 40% for 10 seconds and increases strength by 10% for the remainder of the quest when the user's HP drops to 30%. This is kind of bad. If it were 40% permanently and 10% temporarily, that would be great. Or even 25-25 would be great. Unfortunately, having the 10% permanent, it's just very low. I still don't think this is that good of an ability. I don't think this was ever really that good of an ability. I guess it's okay that you're getting a permanent 10% strength buff, but yeah, nothing to write home about on this. Potent Curse Res of 100%, kind of nice. Other than Galayuden, I think that Alfonse is the only 100% Curse Res sword right now. So it's kind of nice. Not a lot of people run Highest Odiarch's Trial, but Alfonse can be effective in that. Galayuden has unique mechanics that let him change how that fight is played, but if you're trying to play it in a more traditional way, Alfonse seems like he's totally fine. And then Skill Haste of 10%, this is up. I think it used to be 8%. Perhaps this will help with the high cost of Blue Radiance to get that out a little faster and make it more spammable. Getting this to be more spammable is relevant. Like, if you can have that strength buff double up because of how quickly you're casting Blue Radiance, that is something very cool. But I'm not sure. We'll have to see exactly what the SP costs are like when the new Mana Spiral information is revealed. I don't think they've typically played with the SP costs, and I haven't checked if 10% would make a difference on his old kit, but perhaps 10% in combination with some Skill Haste Prince or something like that, or if Light ever gets a dragon like Ariel, maybe that could be good. But now, that is officially it for this video. We looked at all the Mana Spiral characters, we talked about the story chapter, we speculated about Ciella. You're going to know all about this information very soon, since all this content is releasing tomorrow and in the weeks to come. So let me know what you think about everything that's coming up, or if you're watching this later on, was I right? Was I wrong with any of this analysis? I'm sure you know better than I do at this point. Like I said at the beginning of this video, wanted to make this to kind of get ahead of things as we have so much happening, so much coming up. And just to say, as one final reminder, that this is a really good time to jump into Dragalia Lost. A lot is about to go down in the game. If you're a fan of Fire Emblem, now is a great time to start playing. That is going to do it for this video, everyone. Thank you so much for watching. Take care, and I'll see you next time.